The young Marine arrived at the base early in the morning, her boots crunching against the gravel path as she carried a small duffel bag over her shoulder. She was quiet, keeping her head down, but inside, her mind raced with a mix of excitement and nerves. This was her first assignment in the main base mess hall, a place buzzing with activity, where Marines from all ranks came together to eat, relax, or exchange stories. She had trained hard to reach this point, waking up before dawn every day, pushing through grueling exercises, learning every rule and routine. But she knew that the challenges she would face here went beyond physical strength. They were about proving herself in an environment that could be tough, judgmental, and sometimes unfair. As she stepped into the mess hall, she felt a wave of intensity. The room was large, filled with rows of tables and the low hum of conversations. The smell of breakfast hung in the air, bacon sizzling, coffee brewing, bread toasting. But she barely noticed it. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. There were Marines in uniform moving with practiced efficiency, some chatting, some reading reports, some simply eating in silence. She noticed a few who gave her curious glances, some polite, some not so much. She had been warned that not all Marines welcomed newcomers warmly, and she could feel the weight of those unspoken judgments already pressing on her shoulders. A tall Marine approached her from across the room. His uniform was crisp, and his stance carried the confidence of someone who had been in the base longer than she had. He was a senior figure in the mess hall, used to being in control, and his eyes lingered on her in a way that made her heart beat faster. She could sense his skepticism. He seemed to doubt whether she belonged in this space. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and reminded herself that she had trained just as hard, if not harder, than anyone here. She moved toward a table, holding her tray carefully. Each step felt heavy, as though the eyes of everyone in the hall weighed her down. Some whispered to each other, some stared openly. It was the first time she felt the subtle, sharp sting of exclusion, not overt or cruel, but enough to make her question herself for a moment. She reminded herself that this was part of the process. The military demanded more than just skill. It demanded courage in the face of scrutiny, and she was determined not to let doubt win. As she walked, she noticed other Marines managing their trays with ease, chatting and laughing. Their confidence made her momentarily jealous, but she quickly turned that feeling into determination. She knew that this was not a competition with others, but with herself. Each small step she took was a challenge, and each careful movement of her tray was a test of her patience and composure. She kept her eyes forward, focusing on the path to her assigned seat, ignoring the occasional stares or whispers that tried to shake her focus. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she saw the Marine who would later shove her. He was standing near the serving line, talking to a group of friends, exuding authority and control. There was a certain arrogance in the way he moved, a confidence that came from knowing he was respected or feared by those around him. At that moment, he barely noticed her, and yet there was something in his expression, a flicker of judgment, that made her grip her tray a little tighter. She didn't know it yet, but this brief encounter would soon change her day in a way she never expected. Despite the tension, she reminded herself why she was here. She had joined the Marines not just to follow orders, but to prove that skill, integrity, and courage were more important than intimidation or prejudice. She thought about her training, the hours she had spent perfecting her drills, learning the rules and testing her endurance. She thought about her family, friends, and mentors who had believed in her, and she drew strength from their support. The young Marine stepped carefully toward the table assigned to her. Every movement was deliberate, every step measured. She knew that one wrong move could draw unnecessary attention, but she also knew that fear could never control her. She felt a quiet strength growing inside, a sense of readiness that no one could take away. The mess hall, with all its bustling energy, judgmental stares, and unspoken hierarchy, was simply another challenge to overcome. She would face it head-on with dignity, focus, and determination. As she reached her table, she paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was the first step of many. She had made it through the entrance, navigated the stairs, and held her composure. The real test, the one that would push her limits, was about to begin, and she was ready. The young Marine sat down, her tray in front of her, eyes alert, heart steady. Little did she know that the events about to unfold in this very mess hall would not only challenge her courage but also become the moment where respect, honor, and recognition would finally meet the resilience she had carried with her all along. The young Marine had just settled at her assigned table when she heard the low hum of conversation rise around her. The mess hall was alive with movement, trays clattering, voices mixing, and footsteps echoing across the tile floor. She carefully balanced her tray, which held her breakfast, a simple but satisfying meal she had earned through early mornings and relentless training. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, thinking she could finally take a breath. But that calm was about to be shattered. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the Marine she had seen earlier, the one with the confident, almost arrogant presence. He had his eyes on her now, though he pretended otherwise, talking with a few friends near the serving line. Something in the way he moved made it clear that he saw her not as a fellow Marine but as someone who didn't quite belong. She tightened her grip on her tray, sensing tension in the air, but told herself not to let it intimidate her. She had trained for moments like this, where patience and composure mattered as much as strength. She began to move toward the exit of the mess hall. Her tray balanced carefully in her hands, her steps steady, her mind focused on maintaining control. Yet, as she walked past a group of Marines standing near the center, the tall Marine stepped slightly in front of her path. His movement was casual, almost playful, but the intent was clear. He wasn't there to help or guide her. He was testing her. The whispers from nearby Marines grew louder, a mix of curiosity and amusement at the tension building in front of them. Suddenly, without warning, the Marine shoved her. The push wasn't strong enough to knock her over completely, but it was enough to cause her to stumble and nearly drop her tray. Eggs slid across the edge, coffee sloshed dangerously, and her breakfast wobbled like a fragile tower. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. All around her, Marines stopped what they were doing to watch, some with shocked expressions, some with barely concealed smirks. Her heart raced, a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief flooding through her. She could feel her cheeks burn as she quickly caught herself, steadying the tray in her hands with shaking fingers. She refused to let the act of aggression defeat her, even though the situation stung sharply. This was not just about breakfast or a spilled tray. It was about respect, pride, and proving her worth in a place that could sometimes feel harsh and unfair. For a moment, she simply froze, gathering her thoughts. The Marine who shoved her looked down at her with a mix of surprise and satisfaction, as if he expected her to crumble or lash out. Some of the other Marines laughed quietly, not loudly enough to be called out, but enough to make her feel the eyes of the room on her. Despite the humiliation, she refused to show weakness. She had learned through months of grueling training that control and poise often spoke louder than anger or words. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and continued moving toward the exit, her tray still balanced. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she reminded herself that every Marine faced challenges like this at some point. Some dealt with them physically, others mentally, but the key was to remain composed. She felt a quiet strength inside her, a determination that had been built over countless early mornings, exhausting drills, and moments when she had pushed herself beyond limits she thought possible. The Marine who had shoved her noticed that she wasn't falling apart. His expression shifted subtly from smugness to something else. Curiosity, perhaps even a hint of respect. The room seemed to hold its breath as she passed, the whispers fading slightly as people recognized her composure under pressure. Her peers, some of whom had doubted her, started to see a side of her they hadn't expected. Calm, resilient, unshaken. As she reached her table and set the tray down carefully, she allowed herself a tiny moment to steady her breathing. The initial shock of the shove was gone, replaced by a focused determination. She knew the day wasn't over, and the challenges she faced here would continue, but she also knew something crucial. How she handled this moment mattered more than the shove itself. Humiliation was temporary. Respect was built over time, through actions, courage, and the way she carried herself even when tested. She glanced briefly at the Marine who had shoved her. He was watching her now more closely than before, as if trying to figure out what made her stand tall when others might have faltered. She realized, in that instant, that the incident had changed something. An unspoken tension now existed between them. She didn't need to speak or act aggressively. Her composure had already made the statement. She had turned what could have been a moment of defeat into an opportunity to demonstrate her strength and character. The young Marine sat quietly, eating her breakfast with deliberate calm. Around her, the mess hall returned to its usual rhythm, but she carried with her a new awareness. She had faced the first real test of her day and had met it with dignity. In her mind, she replayed the moment, not as a source of shame but as a reminder of her inner strength and resilience. This incident, as difficult as it had been, was a stepping stone. She understood now that the road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to meet every challenge head-on, with courage and confidence. After the incident in the mess hall, the young Marine walked back to her quarters feeling a mixture of emotions she couldn't easily name. Anger, embarrassment, and frustration swirled inside her, but alongside them was a spark she recognized: determination. She knew that letting this moment define her would only weaken her, and she refused to give anyone, even the Marine who had shoved her, that power. Instead, she chose to focus on something she could control: herself. Sitting on the edge of her bunk, she carefully placed her gear down and took a deep breath. The morning sunlight streamed through the small window, but she barely noticed it. Her mind replayed the incident repeatedly. The shove, the spilled food, the eyes of everyone watching, but she refused to linger on shame. She had faced challenges before, in training and in life, and each time she had learned that resilience was not something you were born with. It was something you built, moment by moment, through choice and action. She thought back to the hours of grueling training she had endured to become a Marine. The endless drills, the early mornings, the exhausting runs through mud and rain. It had all been preparation, not just for physical strength, but for moments exactly like this. She remembered her instructors, their sharp voices pushing her beyond what she thought was possible. She remembered the pain in her muscles, the stinging cold, and the times she had wanted to give up. But she hadn't. She had kept going, step after step, refusing to let herself fall behind. And now, in the face of humiliation, she drew on every ounce of that training. Her thoughts also turned to the people who had believed in her. Family, friends, and mentors who had supported her even when they couldn't be there physically. They had told her she was capable, that she could handle challenges that seemed impossible, and she reminded herself of their faith. Their belief in her became a shield, protecting her from self-doubt and fear. She knew that she had to honor their trust by rising above the petty aggression she had experienced. She also reflected on the culture around her. The military was a place where respect had to be earned, and not everyone welcomed newcomers warmly. She understood that some of the male Marines might feel threatened by her presence, or simply unaccustomed to seeing women in positions that demanded attention and competence. This awareness didn't make the situation easier, but it gave her perspective. She realized that their actions were more about their own insecurities than her abilities. Recognizing that allowed her to take a step back emotionally, giving her control over her response rather than letting her anger control her. Determined to turn her feelings into action, she decided to use the rest of the day to prove herself through her performance. She reviewed her duties in her mind, recalling every detail she needed to execute perfectly. She planned her movements carefully, making sure every task would be done efficiently, with precision and confidence. The mess hall incident, while humiliating, had ignited a quiet fire in her, a motivation to show that she was not only capable but extraordinary. Throughout the day, she approached her responsibilities with renewed focus. Every task she performed, from routine maintenance to minor administrative work, she did with care, attention, and excellence. She moved quietly but efficiently, her presence becoming noticeable to others in subtle ways. She made no overt statements, no confrontational gestures, but the way she carried herself began to speak volumes. Her calm under pressure, her efficiency, and her professionalism drew the eyes of those around her, including the Marine who had shoved her earlier. As she worked, she imagined the mess hall incident again, not as a source of pain but as a challenge she had already overcome. She reminded herself that courage was not about never being afraid or insulted. It was about taking control of the situation, standing tall, and proving oneself through actions. Every precise movement, every successful task, was a declaration of her inner strength. By focusing on her skills rather than the actions of others, she turned a moment of humiliation into a stepping stone for personal growth. Later, during a brief break, she reflected on what she had learned. Strength wasn't just physical. It was emotional and mental, built through endurance, patience, and the ability to stay composed under scrutiny. She realized that the shove, while painful in the moment, had highlighted qualities within her that she could now choose to amplify. Resilience, focus, and determination. She understood that the path ahead would be filled with similar tests, and the way she handled this one would set the tone for every challenge to come. By the end of the day, she felt a sense of quiet pride. She had taken control of her narrative, refusing to let a single act of aggression define her worth. She had turned embarrassment into motivation, frustration into focus, and a moment of weakness into an opportunity for strength. She knew that she was ready for whatever came next, that her courage and professionalism would not go unnoticed, and that the respect she sought would come through persistence and excellence. That night, as she prepared for bed, she felt a calm resolve. The young Marine understood that the real battle wasn't always physical. It was sometimes internal, fought with patience, composure, and determination. She had passed the first test not with confrontation, but with dignity, and that victory, though quiet, was powerful. The experience had strengthened her, preparing her for the bigger challenges ahead, where her courage and skills would soon be recognized by more than just herself. The next few days passed in a blur of activity, and the young Marine approached each moment with the quiet determination she had discovered within herself. The mess hall incident still lingered in her mind, but instead of dwelling on it, she focused on proving her capability through action. She understood that respect wasn't given, it was earned, step by step, task by task. And so she set out to show her worth in the way she knew best, by excelling in everything she did. From the very first assignment that morning, she moved with precision and purpose. She handled her tasks carefully, whether it was organizing supplies, assisting in meal preparation, or helping fellow Marines with their routines. Every movement was deliberate, every action carried out with efficiency and confidence. Those around her started noticing. Some were quiet admirers, impressed by her attention to detail and professionalism. Others, who had initially doubted her, couldn't ignore the competence she displayed. Her calm under pressure became evident, and even small achievements, like completing a task faster or more accurately than expected, began to earn her subtle nods of approval. The Marine who had shoved her before began to observe her more closely. At first, there was skepticism in his eyes, a disbelief that she could maintain such composure after the mess hall incident. But as the days passed, his expression changed, slowly giving way to grudging respect. He started to realize that she was not just another recruit to be dismissed or intimidated. She had skills, patience, and a determination that set her apart. His attitude softened, though he did not openly admit it, and the other Marines began to follow suit, taking cues from his subtle shift in perception. As she worked, the young Marine remained focused on excellence, understanding that her actions spoke louder than words. She offered help where needed, but she did so with quiet confidence rather than seeking attention. She knew that making a scene or demanding recognition would diminish the respect she was trying to build. Instead, she let her performance and conduct demonstrate her abilities. Slowly, the initial whispers of doubt began to transform into conversations of acknowledgement. "She's good at this," one Marine would say. "I didn't expect that," another admitted. These small affirmations, though unspoken loudly, reinforced her belief that she was moving in the right direction. One afternoon, she was assigned to assist in a particularly challenging task, coordinating supplies for a special training exercise. The task required careful planning, organization, and the ability to work under pressure. She approached it systematically, taking notes, checking details, and anticipating potential problems. Her supervisors noticed her thoroughness and began to trust her judgment on small decisions. She executed the plan flawlessly, ensuring that everything was prepared on time and without errors. That day, she realized that competence and diligence could speak louder than any argument or confrontation. Even the Marines who had been dismissive at first began to acknowledge her quietly. Small gestures, a nod, a brief comment, a look of approval, signaled that her presence was being recognized in a way it hadn't been before. She didn't let it go to her head. She remained humble, knowing that real respect was built over time, not in a single moment. Each successful task reinforced her confidence, making her more resilient to challenges and more focused on her long-term goals. The young Marine also noticed changes in her own mindset. Where she had once felt anxious and self-conscious, she now felt a quiet strength. She understood that the earlier shove in the mess hall had been an obstacle, not a defeat. It had forced her to rely on her inner resources, patience, focus, and determination. She had turned humiliation into motivation, and each day that passed became an opportunity to prove not just her skills, but her character. Her growing reputation did not go unnoticed by higher-ranking officers. Though they observed quietly, they began to see the emerging pattern. A young Marine who remained composed under pressure, completed her tasks with excellence, and maintained professionalism even when challenged. These qualities were essential in a leader, and they recognized that she possessed them in abundance. By the end of the week, the young Marine had established herself as someone reliable, capable, and respected. Her confidence had grown, and with it, her presence in the mess hall and throughout the base became more noticeable. She had turned what had initially seemed like a setback into a platform for growth. The very Marine who had pushed her before now treated her differently, not with hostility, but with cautious acknowledgement of her abilities. The other Marines began to mirror this shift, creating an environment where her skills could be recognized and appreciated. The experience taught her an important lesson. True strength was not about dominating others or retaliating for slights. It was about maintaining composure, performing consistently at a high level, and allowing actions to demonstrate capability and character. She understood now that respect was earned through excellence, patience, and resilience, not by shouting, fighting, or seeking immediate approval. As she prepared for the next day, the young Marine reflected on the progress she had made. She had faced doubt, hostility, and humiliation, yet she had remained steadfast. Her efforts had begun to change perceptions, earning her recognition and establishing her as a competent, reliable Marine. The journey was far from over, but she was ready for the challenges ahead, confident that her dedication and professionalism would continue to open doors and earn respect in ways that mere confrontation never could. By turning adversity into motivation, she had begun to shape her story not as a victim, but as a rising figure whose courage, skill, and persistence would soon be recognized by those who mattered most. The next chapter of her journey promised new challenges, but she was ready to face them with the same determination that had carried her this far. The morning air on the base was crisp, filled with the usual hum of activity, but something felt different that day. The young Marine moved through her routine with the same focus and precision she had cultivated over the past week. Tasks that might have once intimidated her now felt manageable, even familiar. She carried herself with confidence, her steps purposeful, her mind alert. She knew that her actions were being observed by others, though she didn't yet realize just how closely. Suddenly, a ripple of excitement spread through the base. Orders were being shouted, radios crackled with messages, and Marines scrambled to prepare for visitors. A group of high-ranking officers, 4 generals from different branches, were arriving for an inspection. This was not an everyday occurrence. It was rare for such senior leaders to appear unannounced. The energy on the base shifted immediately. What had been a routine day transformed into a moment of high stakes. Everyone knew that first impressions mattered, and that mistakes would not go unnoticed. The young Marine felt her heart quicken, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She had faced challenges before, moments where her skill and composure were tested. This was another opportunity to demonstrate her competence. She moved with purpose, making sure her uniform was immaculate, her tasks were completed efficiently, and her demeanor was professional. Every small detail mattered. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the precision with which she executed her duties. Marines around her buzzed with nervous energy, rushing to clean, organize, and prepare for the arrival of the generals. Some whispered speculations, wondering why these high-ranking officers had chosen their base. Others tried to anticipate what the generals might be looking for: efficiency, discipline, leadership, or perhaps even a sign of weakness. Amid this flurry of activity, the young Marine maintained her focus, quietly performing her duties with meticulous care. She had learned that in moments of chaos, calm and competence stood out the most. As the generals entered the base, their presence was immediately commanding. Tall, imposing figures in crisp uniforms, they moved with authority and a sharp awareness of their surroundings. Their eyes scanned the room, noting details, observing interactions, and evaluating performance. For the young Marine, it was a moment that could have been intimidating, but she instead felt a sense of readiness. She had trained for challenges like this, even if she hadn't imagined they would come so soon. The generals made their way through the mess hall, which was now bustling with activity as Marines lined up and performed their routines with precision. Every step was scrutinized, every movement noted. The young Marine carried her tray carefully, her posture perfect, her eyes alert but calm. She noticed the subtle shift in attention around her. The general's gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on those who performed tasks efficiently, those who demonstrated leadership, and those who remained composed under pressure. It was in this moment that the young Marine realized her previous efforts had prepared her perfectly. Her attention to detail, her consistent performance, and her calm demeanor were all being recognized without a word being spoken. She moved confidently, anticipating needs before they arose, assisting others quietly, and completing her own tasks flawlessly. Even the Marines who had been dismissive before could not help but notice the transformation. She was no longer just a newcomer. She was someone whose presence mattered, whose competence demanded acknowledgement. One of the generals paused, his eyes sweeping over the room, and for a brief moment, they landed on her. He observed her carefully, noting how she moved, how she interacted, how she managed her tasks under the heightened scrutiny. Unlike some others who fumbled or appeared flustered, she remained steady, unshaken by the pressure of the general's attention. It was a small moment, but it carried immense weight. In a room filled with activity, she stood out not because she was loud or demanding, but because she was composed, efficient, and professional. The young Marine felt a surge of quiet pride. She didn't need anyone else to validate her efforts. She knew that her actions were speaking for themselves. The generals continued their inspection, moving from table to table, observing the discipline and efficiency of the Marines under their watch. Each interaction, each task completed flawlessly, was a silent testament to her dedication and resilience. She realized that this was a turning point, a moment where her hard work, focus, and perseverance could finally be recognized by those with the power to influence her career and reputation. Even the Marine who had shoved her days before seemed to notice her in a new light. He watched as she carried herself with quiet confidence, helping others while completing her own duties with precision. There was no arrogance in her movements, no desire to prove him wrong directly. Instead, her competence spoke louder than any argument or confrontation ever could. The whispers of doubt among other Marines were gradually replaced by murmurs of admiration and respect. By the end of the general's initial inspection, the young Marine understood that she had passed a critical test, not through confrontation, but through consistent excellence and quiet courage. The attention of the generals had been fleeting yet powerful, and it confirmed what she had already known. Perseverance, skill, and composure were the keys to earning respect and recognition. She had transformed from a newcomer, underestimated and dismissed, into someone whose presence could not be ignored. As the generals moved on, leaving the room buzzing with excitement and renewed energy, the young Marine reflected on what had just happened. This was more than an inspection. It was a validation of her hard work, resilience, and determination. She realized that the path ahead would continue to present challenges, but now she had evidence that her efforts could not only withstand scrutiny, they could shine under it. She felt a quiet but powerful sense of readiness for whatever came next, knowing that her skills, composure, and dedication were finally being seen by those who mattered most. The mess hall, usually a place of routine and quiet tension, felt different that day. The young Marine moved through it with the steady confidence she had been building since the morning of the incident. The room was buzzing with activity as other Marines carried trays, cleaned tables, and assisted one another. Yet beneath the surface, a tense anticipation lingered. Everyone knew the generals were inside the base, and their presence added an invisible weight to every action, every step, every glance. As she walked, she noticed how the atmosphere had shifted. The earlier whispers and casual chatter had been replaced by a sense of focused energy. Marines were paying attention to their posture, their movements, and their interactions, knowing that any mistake could be noticed by the high-ranking officers observing the room. For the young Marine, this was another test, a chance to show that she could remain composed and professional, even under extraordinary scrutiny. Then, the generals entered the mess hall fully, their presence commanding attention immediately. Tall, disciplined, and impeccably uniformed, they moved with precision, observing everything around them. Their eyes scanned the room, taking note of efficiency, attention to detail, and leadership among the Marines. Conversations dropped to hushed tones. The clatter of trays and utensils seemed to pause as their gaze swept across the hall. Every Marine felt the pressure, yet the young Marine stood tall, her posture straight, her hands steady on her tray, her eyes calm but alert. As the generals passed her, she felt a subtle but undeniable awareness. They were observing her closely. She didn't flinch, didn't fidget, and didn't try to draw attention to herself. She simply moved with quiet confidence, performing her duties flawlessly, offering assistance when needed, and handling her responsibilities with care. Every step, every movement, every small gesture spoke volumes. It was not loud or boastful, but it radiated competence, calm, and professionalism. The Marine who had shoved her days earlier was nearby, and she could see him noticing the general's attention toward her. His expression shifted slightly, from casual arrogance to curiosity, and perhaps even concern. He had expected her to be uncomfortable, to falter under scrutiny, but she was doing the exact opposite. She was calm, precise, and fully in control. In a room full of experienced Marines, she had managed to stand out, not by competing or drawing attention, but by simply performing her duties perfectly and with dignity. One of the generals paused near her, his eyes studying her actions carefully. He watched as she balanced her tray effortlessly, offered guidance to a fellow Marine who had dropped utensils, and completed her tasks with efficiency and grace. He observed her composure under the pressure of observation, the way she quietly managed her responsibilities while remaining aware of the larger environment around her. It was clear to him that she possessed qualities beyond mere training: focus, leadership, and the ability to remain calm under stress. Around her, other Marines began to notice the shift. The murmurs of doubt that had once surrounded her were now replaced by whispers of respect. They were seeing someone who had turned adversity into strength, who had demonstrated resilience without arrogance. She didn't need to boast or argue. Her actions spoke for her. The Marine who had shoved her earlier now seemed conflicted, unsure of how to respond. He had underestimated her, and now he had to acknowledge her abilities silently, without drawing attention to himself. The generals continued their inspection, moving through the hall, observing interactions, efficiency, and leadership. Every small gesture she made was noticed. The way she adjusted a chair for a fellow Marine, the way she ensured the tables were clean, the way she completed her tasks without hesitation. These simple actions, done with precision and respect, were far more powerful than words could ever be. They demonstrated her professionalism, her dedication, and her ability to handle pressure. Even as the room bustled with activity, the young Marine remained fully present in the moment. She had learned to focus on what she could control: her actions, her attitude, and her composure. She did not let the presence of the generals intimidate her, nor did she allow the whispers of other Marines to distract her. Each task was executed with care and attention, a quiet demonstration of her skill and dedication. By the time the generals moved further down the hall, it was clear that the young Marine had left a lasting impression. Her calmness, efficiency, and professionalism had not only been noticed by the high-ranking officers but also by her peers. Even the Marine who had shoved her earlier could no longer ignore her capabilities. Respect, earned through consistent effort and composure, had begun to replace doubt and skepticism. As the generals moved on, the young Marine took a deep breath, allowing herself a quiet sense of pride. She had faced one of the highest pressure situations of her career so far, remaining composed and professional while being scrutinized by some of the most powerful figures in the military. This moment was more than a test of skill. It was a testament to her resilience, her focus, and her ability to turn past humiliation into quiet strength. She understood now that respect wasn't demanded, and recognition wasn't given lightly. It was earned through consistent action, professionalism, and the courage to stand tall under pressure. This experience had not only proven her competence to others, but had strengthened her confidence in herself. She knew that the challenges ahead would be greater, but she also knew that she had what it took to face them with courage and composure. In that moment, amidst the organized chaos of the mess hall, the young Marine had become more than a recruit. She had become a presence that could not be ignored, a figure of quiet strength whose actions had begun to speak louder than any words or doubts ever could. The mess hall was alive with energy, but now it was different. A sense of anticipation hung in the air. Everyone, from the most junior Marine to the seasoned staff, seemed aware that something extraordinary was about to happen. The young Marine stood at her station, steady and calm, her eyes alert but her expression composed. She had faced scrutiny before, but nothing compared to the presence of the four generals now moving purposefully through the hall. Their attention was keen, their observation sharp, and every Marine present knew that these officers could shape reputations and careers with a single glance or comment. As the generals reached the center of the hall, one of them paused, scanning the Marines before him. He noticed the young Marine, who had remained calm and efficient throughout the morning. Her composure, her professionalism, and her quiet competence had already set her apart from the rest. She was performing her duties with precision, helping others when needed, and handling her responsibilities without a hint of hesitation. In a room full of disciplined personnel, she had quietly distinguished herself, not through words or bravado, but through action and character. The senior general stepped forward, signaling subtly for her to approach. For a brief moment, the young Marine felt a flicker of nerves, but it was quickly replaced by focus. She knew that this was not a moment for fear. It was a moment for demonstration of the values she had cultivated through training, resilience, and experience. She walked toward the generals with steady steps, her posture upright, her head held high, her tray set aside. Every movement conveyed calm assurance, a silent statement that she was ready, capable, and worthy of recognition. As she stood before the generals, the room seemed to pause. Conversations faded, footsteps slowed, and even the usual hum of activity dimmed in anticipation. The Marine who had shoved her days before was nearby, watching with an expression that mixed guilt, surprise, and grudging admiration. The other Marines looked on, sensing that a moment of importance was unfolding, one that went beyond routine inspection or duty. This was a moment of honor, a moment where courage, resilience, and professionalism would be acknowledged in front of everyone present. The senior general spoke, his voice commanding but calm, carrying across the room with clarity. He praised her for her composure under pressure, her efficiency in completing tasks, and her dedication to her duties. He described her actions as exemplary, emphasizing that true leadership and respect were earned through consistency, skill, and integrity. Every word reinforced the value of patience, courage, and professionalism, and it was clear that she embodied each of these qualities in abundance. The young Marine stood quietly, listening with a mixture of pride and humility. She did not smile broadly or boast. Instead, She allowed her presence and actions to reflect the acknowledgement she was receiving. She understood that honor was not about display. It was about responsibility, character, and the way one carried oneself under scrutiny. Her training, her perseverance, and her ability to rise above humiliation had prepared her for this moment, and now it had arrived in full measure. The generals continued, highlighting the importance of resilience in the face of adversity. They referenced the challenges she had overcome, the patience she had shown, and the professionalism she had maintained despite the doubts and dismissive attitudes of those around her. The words resonated through the mess hall, not only affirming her worth, but also inspiring other Marines to reflect on the values that defined their service. It was a lesson in courage and conduct, delivered publicly, and embodied perfectly by the young Marine herself. At this moment, she felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The Marine who had shoved her now looked uncomfortable, his earlier arrogance replaced by acknowledgement of her abilities. There was no need for confrontation or argument. Her actions, steadfast and composed, had already made the point. The whispers of doubt that had once surrounded her were replaced by nods of respect and quiet admiration. The room seemed to recognize that she had not just completed her duties, she had elevated them through excellence and dignity. The general then presented her with a formal commendation, symbolizing recognition for her exemplary behavior and courage. It could have been a medal, a certificate, or an official acknowledgement, but the meaning went far beyond a physical token. It was a public affirmation that her perseverance, skill, and character had not gone unnoticed. She had transformed a moment of humiliation into an opportunity to demonstrate strength, and the recognition she received now confirmed the value of her dedication and resilience. As she accepted the honor, she felt a quiet but profound sense of accomplishment. This was not about defeating the Marine who had shoved her or proving herself to anyone else. It was about the integrity and courage she had maintained throughout the challenges she had faced. She understood that true respect and recognition came from the consistent demonstration of skill, composure, and professionalism, and she had earned it through action rather than confrontation. The generals paused, observing the effect her recognition had on those around her. They saw not just a Marine being honored, but an example for everyone present, proof that resilience, patience, and excellence could transform adversity into achievement. The young Marine had become a symbol of determination, strength, and courage under pressure, and the respect she earned would inspire others to strive for the same qualities. As the generals moved on, leaving the room buzzing with admiration and renewed energy, the young Marine returned to her duties with a calm smile. She had faced humiliation, skepticism, and doubt, yet she had risen above them all. In that moment, she was no longer just a recruit. She was a Marine whose strength, courage, and professionalism had been recognized publicly, a testament to the power of resilience and integrity. The young Marine returned to her duties with a sense of calm satisfaction that only comes from hard-earned triumph. The mess hall, once a place of tension and uncertainty, now felt different to her. Every table she passed, every fellow Marine she assisted, seemed infused with a new energy, a quiet respect she had earned through perseverance and excellence. She had faced doubt, humiliation, and subtle hostility, yet through patience, skill, and composure, she had not only survived but had transformed the perception of those around her. The incident in the mess hall that once seemed so significant now felt like a distant stepping stone, an early test of courage that had prepared her for the recognition she had received. As she moved through her day, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the first morning she had arrived at the base, carrying her tray nervously, aware of the skeptical eyes and quiet whispers around her. She recalled the shove from the Marine, the embarrassment, and the surge of anger and frustration that had followed. At the time, it had felt like a crushing moment, a challenge that might define her as weak or incapable. But she had chosen a different path. She had refused to let that moment control her. She had relied on her training, her patience, and her inner resolve to rise above the incident. Now, in the wake of recognition from 4 generals, she saw the full circle of her experience. The humiliation, the doubt, the whispers, they had all been opportunities in disguise. They had forced her to draw on the strength she did not yet fully recognize she possessed. Each small choice she had made to remain calm, to focus on her duties, to demonstrate competence quietly, had led her to this moment. She understood that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Often, it was measured in quiet, consistent actions that built respect over time. The Marine who had shoved her days before had changed as well. He no longer carried the smug arrogance that had once defined him in her eyes. Instead, there was acknowledgement in his gaze, a subtle, unspoken recognition of her skill, professionalism, and courage. He had underestimated her, as had others, but through her actions, she had proven that respect must be earned and cannot be demanded. The whispers that had once doubted her abilities now carried admiration, and she understood that her perseverance had inspired not only herself but those around her. As she continued her day, she noticed the ripple effect of her actions. Younger recruits who had been nervous and unsure now observed her with curiosity and inspiration. They saw someone who had faced adversity, remained steadfast, and emerged with honor. In her quiet way, she had become a role model, a symbol that strength and courage could overcome doubt and hostility. The lessons she had learned through hardship were now lessons she could share through example, demonstrating that resilience and professionalism were qualities that could inspire others to rise to their best selves. The young Marine also reflected on the meaning of recognition and honor. The general's praise had been a powerful validation, but she understood that true achievement was more than accolades. It was the knowledge that she had maintained her integrity, that she had faced adversity with dignity, and that she had used every challenge as an opportunity to grow stronger. The medal or commendation she had received was a symbol, but the real reward lay in the confidence, resilience, and self-respect she had earned. She knew that these qualities would serve her far beyond the mess hall, in every challenge and every responsibility she would face in her career. As the day drew to a close, the young Marine took a quiet moment to herself, standing near a window and looking out over the base. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the orderly buildings and training grounds. She thought about how far she had come, from the nervous recruit navigating her first day to the Marine recognized by generals for her courage and composure. Every step, every choice, every moment of restraint and effort had led her here. The journey had tested her in ways she had never imagined, yet it had also revealed the strength she carried within herself. She understood now that this experience was not just about personal triumph. It was about breaking barriers, challenging assumptions, and setting an example for others. By facing adversity with courage and professionalism, she had shown that respect is earned, not given, and that true strength lies in composure, skill, and integrity. The impact of her actions would extend beyond herself, influencing her peers, future recruits, and the culture around her. As she returned to her duties for the evening, she felt a sense of quiet pride and fulfillment. The challenges she had faced had been transformed into opportunities, and the recognition she had received was a testament not only to her skills but to her character. She had proven to herself and to others that setbacks could become stepping stones, that humility and resilience could command respect, and that courage was often measured in how one carried oneself in moments of quiet adversity. The young Marine walked with her head held high, her steps confident and steady. She had faced the doubts, the whispers, and the shove, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more respected than ever before. In that moment, she realized that the true measure of her journey was not in medals or words of praise, but in the inner strength she had discovered, the respect she had earned, and the inspiration she now carried for others. She had transformed humiliation into triumph, doubt into respect, and challenge into opportunity. And with that understanding, she knew that she was ready for whatever came next, carrying with her the lessons, courage, and resilience that would guide her throughout her life and career.